What's going on, guys? Jordan here with Prescript.com. Now this video is for anyone who suffers from hip pinching. So you get to the bottom of the squat, you just get that kind of pinching pain right in the front of the hip. Now it's very common and it kind of based off two problems of the hip. We got to think the ball and socket joint of that hip is going to be predicated on the position of the femur and the position of the pelvis, right? So we need to make lasting changes to both, and then we need to integrate those changes into a compound movement. So position of the pelvis, we'll work with the dynamic frog first. The dynamic frog is basically you're going to emulate your squat pattern while in kind of an unloaded frog stretch position. So we're going to get down on our forearms, trying to create a relative torso angle that's very similar to that when we're squatting, rather than being up on our hands and really extended. And we're going to slowly do repetitions where we find that end range. Now the key with this is making sure the pelvis isn't hyperextended or isn't tilted forward. We want to make sure that we keep a neutral pelvis, keep the core tight as we push the end range of our squat in that unloaded frog stretch position. Now, secondly, we're going to foam roll the iliotibial band. Now, conventional foam rolling of the iliotibial band is a little bit misguided. The iliotibial band is fascia, it's connective tissue. It's not necessarily neurologically responsive to deep pressure stimulus like sticking a lacrosse ball or a foam roller into muscles, right? Muscles kind of have a relaxation reflex that responds to deep pressure stimulus. Fascia doesn't really have that hard wiring. So what we're gonna do instead, rather than just rolling back and forth, is we're gonna start to pin in one place on the iliotibial band and begin to flex and extend the hamstring and the quad to get some dynamic motion under that pinning of the ITB. The ITB is going to be what relays hip stability primarily from the femoral acetabular joint. So it's the TFL, the tensor fascia lata, the glute med and the glute max. They all sort of transfer that force through the IT to exact their movement, or in most cases of stability, to resist movement from happening. So we can get a lot of issues here that lead to that femur kind of jamming up into that hip socket. So after we're done those two things, the dynamic frog and the dynamic foam roll of the ITB, what we're gonna do is we're gonna repattern the whole system. So when we're squatting, we get in this anteriorly tilted position, so our rib cage flares up, our pelvis kind of tips forward. Then imagine this is the socket of the ball and socket. When the pelvis tilts forward, that happens. So if this femur is flexing and this is closing down, that's when you're going to get that pinching pain. So it's trying to teach the pelvis and the femur to move kind of synchronously to move together. So that's going to be the counterbalance squat. So we're going to hold a weight at arm's length. We're going to tuck our rib cage down, create a slight posterior tilt of the pelvis, and then rewire our squatting pattern from there after performing the dynamic frog and the dynamic foam roll of the ITB. So most people, they're here, low back is arched. I want you to be here. Tense up the rib cage, tuck it down, then slowly push back, find that stretch, come up, alleviate, reset, tuck the pelvis underneath, then push back down into the next rep. Come up again, reset, tuck the rib cage down, pelvis underneath, and try and push down a little bit further every rep. All right, so we're gonna go through dynamic foam rolling of the iliotibial band. So as I alluded to before, more often than not, we're gonna see this, right? That foam roller just on the side, and we're just oscillating back and forth. Well, the iliotibial band isn't neurologically wired to respond to deep pressure stimulus. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna anchor the foot right in front of that knee. Now we're gonna keep this bottom heel off the ground. We're lowered down onto the forearm. We're gonna start flexing that hamstring and then flex the quad. So the iliotibial band is gonna go right up from the side of the knee, right up to the trochanter of the hip. So we're gonna pick 4 points along that track to stop, flex the hamstring, fully flex that quad through terminal knee extension, get the VMO active, and then back again. So we're gonna go 3 rounds of flexion extension at 3 separate points, all the way up the IT band. All right, guys, so lastly, we're gonna go over the counterbalance squat. Now, this is really important for rewiring the femur and pelvis position. So a lot of people, they get into this problem when they start squatting and they start shooting their hips back first, right? So now with this counterbalance, it's gonna be really obvious that we don't wanna start creating a lot of extension through that low back. So what you're gonna do, arms at shoulder height. Now from here, tuck the rib cage down, just like we were doing when we were doing the dynamic frog. I want you to lead with the knees all the way down and then up. So it's gonna punish you if I start to sit back. That's where you're gonna get the hip pinching. You're gonna feel a lot of stress in your low back, and that's the movement we're trying to rewire. So rather than sitting back, I want you to think rib cage down, lead with the knees, sit at the bottom, and then up.